Hi guys. So welcome to the goal setting workshop. What I've done is I've put together a little introduction here. Actually, a couple of days after the talk I did on Monday, just to kind of highlight a couple of key points before we get in there. The video that I recorded from Monday's session, I've just edited down a little bit. There's a couple of little tasks in there that I put forward, so I've just kind of edited those so it's kind of it's not this big kind of quick kind of silence bit in there as well when people are doing bits and pieces. So I've edited that down a little bit, but all of the key points that I talked about are all there. So what I want to start off with here, just in this quick intro, is just to make sure that I really put forward the importance of goal setting. Setting goals, it's what I would kind of refer to as our guiding light. It's the thing that it's the light at the end of the tunnel that gives us an understanding of where we're going, and the process goals and the performance goals we set in there. Those are the stepping stones that we have to take in order to get to that light at the end of the tunnel, or that thing that's kind of guiding us towards where we want to go. It's an important part of all of this. It's a life skill, and I want to really emphasize that now before this starts, that it's a skill that you can take forward. Even if you go into work, when you have performance reviews at work, you've got to be able to understand where your strengths are, where there are areas for improvement are, what are the stepping stones that you need to work towards in the short term, medium term, long term, whatever that looks like in terms of time frame, to actually achieve those. So goal setting is an important thing. It's easy to be neglected. It's a process, I know for me personally, it's taken a little bit of time to kind of nail out how I want to approach it, but I think we're starting to get there now. But it's an important part of this whole process. So I want to really emphasize that. Goal setting is a tool. It's one of a handful of tools that we can utilize and teach athletes and parents as well, and coaches for that matter, how to develop mental skills. Some of our key mental skills, things like motivation, self-confidence, those are just two of a number of those. But in order to develop those, goal setting is a really simple tool that we can develop. That is a skill that needs to be developed in order to help develop, to build and develop those. So the important message here is not to see this as something that just kind of is a check in the box. It is an important tool to learn and a skill that needs to be developed. It's not an easy thing to do to start with, especially when you're young. So developing the skill of setting goals and being understanding of how you need to stretch yourself, or maybe not stretch yourself in certain areas, to make sure that they are realistic and you can move forward on those goals. And as the last point before we get into the video and this little intro is, I want to ask a question just to get you thinking a little bit as to the importance of goal setting and mental skills in particular. If you think of any competitive race in swimming, everyone's opinion will differ greatly on this. I would have my opinion, others will have another one. But I just want you to think for a second before you dive into this video, in terms of physical abilities and mental abilities. If you were to put a percentage out of 100 as to what those two things need to add up to for you personally, what at this point in time, how much of your performance is mental in a percentage and how much of it is physical in a percentage? So I want you to think about that, and that's just something to prime you before you go into this into the talk. So I hope you enjoy that. Like I said, it's slightly edited to make sure there's no gaps. Enjoy it, and I'll see you on the other side.
All right, so anyone who's tuning in to watch the recording of this, hope you're all well, and this is just a little bit of goal setting work today to talk through it. Thank you to the 28 participants that have come in today. That's very awesome of you. So if you've got any questions, throw them in the chat and I'll stop and go through them. But without further ado, let's get going with some goal setting. And hopefully you've had a chance to read the little quote there at the front about goal setting. Nice little one, I thought, that I found in one of my textbooks, just to show you my nerdy side. Right, so just some key messages, and this is spreading throughout this whole process in terms of goal setting. So from a goal setting perspective, what we're trying to achieve here is develop skills for the swimmers to be able to structure goals that actually mean something and have a real strong direction alongside where they want to go as athletes. And one of the big parts of that is what I'm trying to do here is align the athlete, the coach, and the parent in the same direction, so we all understand where the athlete wants to go, and then how we can, as a coach and you guys as parents as well, can help support them move forward with their goals. So that's kind of one of the key points, that we all need to be pointing in the same direction. And fundamentally, this is very much an athlete-led process. So any of you guys who've sat on the sidelines a little bit with goal setting in the past, this is going to challenge you a little bit, and get you thinking a little bit more independently, where myself and your parents become supporters and guiders rather than the ones driving the bus, so to speak. Second point I put there is, in terms of goal setting itself, it's one of a handful of psychological tools that you can really work on to use to build key psychology tools and skills. So the key skills that we look to build within not just goal setting, but anything to do with psychological or mental preparation, I guess, is the self-confidence of the athlete or the coach or the parent for that matter, motivation, your attention and your ability to focus, stress management, which is probably one of the more important ones when it comes to competition in particular. And the final point, which is not necessarily a psychological skill, but something that I know I want to try and push people towards, is this idea of having a mastery orientated mindset. Okay, now the mastery part is focusing on the techniques, the skills, the processes within the training environment and the learning opportunities within the competition environment that will spur you on to ultimately achieve your long-term vision or your long-term version of success. Essentially the opposite of a mastery orientated mindset is an outcome orientated mindset, which focuses more on setting targets. That is, it's about winning, it's about social standing, comparing yourself to others. Obviously winning's not a bad thing, of course, we want to win, but if that's your sole focus when it comes to goal setting, then you're on a bit of a slippery slope, and it's not a particularly robust way to develop self-confidence if winning is your only focus. So that's why things like motivation, attention to focus, stress management, and things like that are important, and they're all built into the program. So hopefully you're following me so far. Our particular process that we'll talk through today is supported by evidence-based practice. Nice little throw out there to any academically inclined people. But I just want to kind of show a little bit that there's a huge evidence base behind what we're trying to do, and it's not just my opinion. Some of it's my opinion, of course. From a goal setting perspective there, and this is the final point before we move forward, is that everything that we do within this goal setting process needs to be integrated to each person's personal values. What their long-term vision is for the future, what their seasonal outcomes are, and what their daily processes are going to be, and what they need to do on a day-to-day basis to achieve their version of success. And you'll see that pattern come up in about 5-10 minutes when we get to the actual goal setting sheet that I've put together, that the values, the long-term vision, the seasonal outcomes, and the daily processes, they literally form a process within the goal setting sheet. So remember that one as we move forward. Right, so just want to kind of move forward with this in mind. This is something that I've really learned over time, is that there was a period of time where I tried to stop people thinking so much about the outcome, but what I've realized is that's not the best way forward in my mind. I think you need to be aware of what outcomes you want. So whether it's to win a medal, whether it's to get a PB, whether it's to qualify for the Olympic Games, whatever it is, you need to be aware of that, and it's got to be part of your goal setting process. But what we truly need to focus on, and what will change move us further towards this the most, is the processes that we follow. So I thought this idea of outcome aware and process focus was probably a good way forward, and a good way to kind of describe this whole thing. So what are goals? I'm not going to spend too much time on this, because most of this is just common sense and generally self-explanatory. So goals give athletes purpose and direction, and provide a standard to measure progress. All right. And there's a little quote here that, this guy Locke, I think it's Locke, in 1981. I can't remember the title of his paper particularly, but that's where I pulled it from. He talked about a really simple way of describing goals, and goals are what an individual is trying to accomplish. It is the object or aim of their actions. All right. So it's basically a guide, and having goals are important in that respect. And I think for you guys as young swimmers, the days where things aren't going well, and where you're having a hard time, or maybe things haven't gone the way that you feel like they should, having a strong set of goals and values and a process to follow, that's what's going to keep you moving forward and keep you positive. Because it's very easy on those bad days, and I'll use the phrase bad days, to lose track a little bit, into to kind of almost throw in the towel mentally, and it can take days or weeks to get back from that. But I think with a strong structured goal process and some strong direction, and the support from myself and your parents as well on your direction, having a strong set of goals will help you move forward in that respect. So in terms of goals to be most effective, they need to be athlete led, and I put in brackets there that the control needs to be there. So swimmers who are listening, you guys are in control of your own destiny, and this is a huge part of the goal setting process. That for me as the coach and your parents, we're guides. We're there to help steer the ship a little bit when you need it, but fundamentally, you guys are in control and you lead this process. It can be challenging for young people, especially moving through school. Generally, we do get told what to do and where to go most of the time. And it can be difficult the first time you get this stuff laid in front of you to say, well, actually, you've got choice and you've got the ability to tell us where you want to go. But fundamentally, guys, that's what we need to do. It needs to be athlete led. And then mum and dad and myself, we support you guys as much as we can. It's linked to personal values and a long-term vision, focused on mastery of skills and techniques and processes and learning. And it's also got to be realistic and motivating. I think, whatever gets you out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning in the motivation category there, if it doesn't get you out of bed at 5 a.m., then maybe it's not tough enough, or maybe it needs to be a little bit further on, if that makes some sense. So types of goals. And this will come up in shortly as well in the process that I'll talk about. So you've got 3 types. You've got process goals, which are focused on improving form, techniques, and strategy. The process goals are the things that you do on a daily basis. It's the thing that's going to build habits. It's what's going to build your day-to-day resilience and your competency in skills that will ultimately get you to that ultimate achievement that you want. Without the process goals, it's very difficult to jump from where you are now to where you want to be. There's performance goals, which are just overall performance. So, how you want to act, how you want to behave on the day. Things like, having a faster time. So if there's a time that you want to hit, that's a performance goal. If it's a school related thing, and I wanted to try and kind of keep the education theme in here a little bit as well, because it's important to you guys. If you want to aim for higher grades or scores at school, then that's a performance goal, but you obviously need processes in front of that to make it happen and to help you get there. And then the final one, outcome goals, focusing on things like qualification, medals, even though don't want to overly talk about winning necessarily, but that's kind of where that stuff fits. And also any future planning. So if you want to go to university, or if you've got a certain job that you want to get, or you want to future proof yourself, outcome goals falls into that category. So it's a little task for you guys, and I apologize that I didn't tell you this in advance. Now, you can use a phone or an iPad or a piece of paper and a pen, whatever you want. And I just want to throw a little task your way. It should only take a couple of minutes. If anyone needs to run and get any paper, or if you want to get something to write on, then that's fine. I do apologize for not saying this in advance. But essentially, this little task, it's called control mapping. And it's a strategy, and there's lots of different strategies for helping people understand what goals are going to be most important for them. And I think before we go into the goal setting process, understanding kind of what specific things are actually important to you or most important to you is a good strategy to go for before you even start putting pen to paper. So this idea of control mapping, it's a two-step process. So all you need to do is make 3 columns on a piece of paper. And at the top of each column, you head one of them with the words can control, the middle one with can influence, and the other one at the end with can't control. All right. So essentially, I'm going to throw some scenarios at you. And on the next slide, there's 6 different categories. 6 different categories? I'm going to check. Yeah, 6. The 6 different categories. And underneath them, there is a scenario or a particular instance that could occur within those ones, where I just want you guys to make a note of which of those things can you control, can you have influence over, or you can't control. And the objective of this is to give you guys a little bit of mental direction to look at the things when you're setting goals, of the things that you should focus on. I'm going to highlight an obvious one, and this may be cheating a little bit, but things like your position in a race, that is something that you legitimately cannot control, because you can't control the actions in the swimming pool anyway. You can't control the actions, goals, and abilities of the other athletes in the water at the same time. You can only deal with what you are doing. So that's an example of something you can't control. So make those columns. I'll give you guys a few minutes. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. But yeah, go through them, put them into the category that you feel is most appropriate. And yeah, just get you guys thinking a little bit about what you feel like is can and can't control and can influence. So that is the table. So you've got, apart from the results one, there's only 3, but you've got 4 things underneath each one. So personal stresses, you've got equipment breaking, feeling pain in an event, getting DQ'd, starting to fall behind a lower ranked athlete. Those are just 4 examples of personal stresses that you might have to deal with in the racing environment. So you just put each of those just in a column, whether it's can't control, can control, or can influence, and then do that with all of the other ones there. Right, so moving forward then. So now we're going to start going into the process that I want to lay out for goal setting, and to give a little bit more context about how I've tried to expand things. So in terms of goal setting, the first point there, starting with the end in mind, this is something that I do in terms of planning for seasons, planning for training, planning for, as deep as training sessions. I think if you need to understand what your objective is at the end of the day, whether it's at the end of a season, at the end of a training session, at the end of a training cycle, whatever it is, you need to know what that is before you can start moving backwards and starting to fill in the detail. And again, that is a mindset that I utilize within the goal setting sheet that I'll get to in a second. Sorry, I'm just admitting someone else. Bear with me. Kirsten, if you just pop yourself on mute, Kirsten. No worries. There we go. Yeah, so starting with the end in mind is an important mindset essentially to have with all of this. You need to know where you're going, which is why I talked about objective, outcome aware at the start of the presentation, and then obviously process focused, and that's how it kind of moves forward. The second point there, each section works backwards to build a step-by-step picture to help you know where you want to go ultimately or within that season, and then giving you performance and process goals in order to help you do it. Third point is, and I've already mentioned this, the athlete is in control and they need to set the direction. And my job as the coach and for mom and dad, or caregiver or whoever it is, our role is to help guide you and support you in a focused manner, and to make sure that we're moving in the right direction as best as we can. What I never want to happen from my perspective is that I take control of the process, because there's a lot of literature and a lot of evidence and studies to show that athletes who lose control or don't have control of this process experience a significantly lower level of outcome or result from this process, and they feel like it's not particularly something that helped them, because essentially they're being dictated to. So it's definitely important to have that control for the athlete. And then the final point there is the goals should be consistently evolving. And this document, or this goal setting template that I've set out, it should be an evolving thing. And in terms of planned reviews built into the program, the last couple of seasons I've tried to work towards having 3 kind of key points through the year. Now, I could be completely transparent. Logistically, it can be quite a big challenge trying to get through everybody. So what I've tried to do is to build in as much ownership for swimmers as I possibly can with all of this, where you guys work through this and I give you prompts throughout the season to review and to go through this process. And then you guys can bring it to me and we can have a short conversation about any changes or tweaks, and I can then build that into the training sessions, into the training plan, and periodically ask you guys how you feel like your progress is going. So instead of kind of having these really isolated 30 minutes kind of once every September, January, May, whatever it is, I'm trying to kind of make it a little bit more consistent, but make it so much more athlete led, just to make sure that I can get around everybody and we can make sure we keep on track with it. So it's kind of a level of convenience for me personally, but at the same time, I feel like it's such a great way forward to make sure that the athletes essentially have full control over it, and essentially becomes about you guys using this to the best way that you possibly can. Right, so moving forward, you guys have probably heard of the phrase SMART goals. Now, I'm going to take this a little further, and I've got the idea of smarter goals. I mean, it's not really much of a revelation in terms of what has been done before, or maybe what you've seen before, but it just adds a couple of extra elements on that I think are quite important. And this is the idea of smarter goals. Like, well, SMART goals have been around for a long time, and it's not a new concept really at all. But the idea of the E and the R, essentially evaluation and relevance, and it kind of adds another dimension to it. So I just want to quickly take you guys through there, and then I'll get cracking on taking you through the goal sheet. So once you've set your goals, and I think this is something that you should do afterwards. So then you can essentially quality check your goals against the smarter goals principle. It's essentially a way of enhancing them and making them, making yourself more accountable. So the smarter goals bit, you got the S, which is specific. So setting a purposeful direction and target for you to work towards. So it's got to have a relevance within the big picture as well as the short term. It's got to be meaningful. So, when you're training through tough times or you hit a bit of a slump in your performance, will that goal keep you focused? And I've already said it earlier on. Will that goal get you up at 5 o'clock in the morning? Is it inspiring enough that on your worst day, when the alarm goes off and you go, oh my goodness, I can't face listening to Chris say good morning to me one more time, do you still get up anyway and you come in and you face me, smiles, coffee and all of that in hand, and still get in there and make progress on your goals? Okay. The next bit, accountable. All right. I think it's important to share your goals with others. Now, there's lots of different strategies that I can kind of promote to you guys. I mean, the simplest one is just sharing it with me and sharing it with your parents. I mean, from a coaching and parent perspective, I mean, it doesn't really get much, there's not too many more levels of accountability to that. We're there to kind of, like I say, guide you, but at the same time, you're making a pretty big investment just showing it to your mum and dad and your coach, because we're the people you tend to see the most. But, you can share it with other swimmers, with your friends. I mean, the more people you do share it within reason, the more accountability you will have. And it puts a good pressure on the process, not a negative pressure, which is something that we don't want to be dealing with. Number 4, wants to be recorded, so written down and visible, not just put in the sock drawer underneath all of those dirty socks and left alone. The 5th one, it's got to be timed, and this is a process I've built into the goal sheet, which I'm coming to in the next slide or two. But fundamentally, setting yourself a deadline to prevent drifting. There is nothing more motivational than having a deadline, and I'm sure your mums and dads will know that from work. And I know that I certainly know that from work. And I always use homework as a good example. That I'm sure that when you guys have got a homework deadline and you've got a teacher breathing down your neck, there's nothing that's pushing you more to get that done than to make sure that you don't have any issues with it. So I think setting a deadline is very important, and it can be easy to avoid. And it's something I've seen quite a lot, and also something I've done to myself, that I haven't set myself tough deadlines, and you end up kind of like I say, drifting away a little bit rather than really pushing yourself to get the job done. The next one, and this is where the extra bits come into it, is you need to evaluate. We need to keep track and keep evolving. So that's kind of things where, maybe I program that in, where we have a conversation about where you're at. I'll be, like I said, I'll be planning in a system where I'll be sending out nudges at regular intervals to prompt you guys to be evaluating what you're doing. There's lots of different things that I've got ideas for to move forward. And to be honest, guys, as swimmers moving forward, I'd love to share ideas in when we get back to the pool, or even if you guys want to ask any questions about at the end about ways that we could do that. I mean, one of the simplest ones is keeping a logbook, and that's something that It feels like it's gone out of fashion a little bit, but the old school logbooks used to be very much about recording training volume and training sets and things like that. But for me personally, I feel like training logs are much more effective when you focus them on things like, have I hit my goals this week? Am I evaluating my weekly performance or my daily performance? You know, it could be like a weekly check-in that you give for yourself in in an A4 little diary or A4 little book, that just once a week on maybe a Saturday or a Sunday, you just sit down with your goals for 5 minutes and go, where am I with this? Like, what is my progress? Like, do I need to update this? Do I need to make it more challenging? And then you can communicate that to me. But even if you didn't, you're setting yourself new standards constantly. And it sounds so simple, but it doesn't get done that much. And I think it's a really effective way of keeping yourself on track and keeping yourself up to date. And then the final one, like I've already said, is being realistic about it. You know, goals will only work if it's not too much of a stretch. And what you need to find is a sweet spot. You know, and this is where, for myself as a coach and your parents, we can help you guys with that. You know, sometimes I actually spoke to a swimmer earlier in the day, and regionals was like kind of almost this kind of long-term vision. But then when we talked about the next season, when I asked, you know, what's possible in the next 12 months, actually qualifying for regionals was pretty much possible in the next year. So we thought, well, actually, do we need to revisit that vision? Do we need to make it a little bit more of a stretch? Do we need to challenge that a little bit? So finding the sweet spot, we can absolutely help you guys with that. But what we don't want to fall into a trap of is going too far where it's too, you know, if you're 11 years old and you're saying, I want to go to the Olympics in 12 months, that's a little unrealistic. Although I won't deny that there's probably been cases of that happening in various sports. But at the same time, if you've been to counties, for example, and then you set counties as a long-term vision, you've already done that. You need to find something different. You need to make it a little bit more challenging. Right. So essentially, that's the presentation-y bits, I guess, of what I wanted to say. So what I'm going to do now, guys, I'm just going to close the presentation, because actually using my spreadsheet version will be a little bit easier for you guys to see, I hope. Ooh, has anyone got a question? I thought I heard a volume thing pop up. Right. Bear with me one sec. Right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share this wonderful spreadsheet with you guys. It's probably just an easier way of doing it. I'm going to zoom in a second, so don't worry if you're finding it a little bit tough to see. So this is just kind of the basic overview of what this year's goal sheet's going to look like. Okay, so it's an A4 sheet, it's one page, and it's a landscape version. That's why it doesn't look very tall. And for those of you who've done stuff like this before, with me in particular, you know, some of it may look familiar in terms of some of its layout, but this is a bit of an evolution that I've tried to make on this, to make it a little bit more systematic, and hopefully a little bit better to integrate into what we do. So before I get right into it, what I've done is I've designed at the moment 3 different levels, and I just want to show you what the differences are before I talk through this first one, because this is the one I'll use for the basic discussion. So level 1, you can see that at the bottom I've got goals, and this is performance and process goals. I've got goals, strengths and areas for improvement, actions to be taken in terms of developing these, when to achieve by, and what your priority of that particular goal is, or how you would prioritize it against the other goals. So just to show you what the differences are, on level 2, I've put that as a 1 to 5 progress bar rather than actions to take. So just so hopefully this makes some sense, but if you think about your outcome goals and what you want to achieve for the season, whatever that performance or process goal happens to be, if you imagine that 5 is the equivalent of nailing that skill so you can achieve your outcome goals. So let's just say it's getting a great 15-meter start and perfecting your technique in that. That might be your process goal. If when you go a certain time on that start, let's just say 7.0 seconds to 15 meters, if 7.0 is a 5 and that gets you your outcome, then you've essentially achieved it if you're a 5. Does that make some sense? If it doesn't, please unmute yourself and tell me, because I want to make sure it makes sense. So what you'd essentially do is you'd mark yourself on that scale of 1 to 5 when you start, where you feel like you sit. So let's just say, for argument's sake, you might, I want to nail my start to 15 meters in 7.0 seconds, which will help me go, I don't know, get a medal at regionals in 100 freestyle, for example, if that's the outcome. If you rate yourself at a 1, every time that you go back to this, you've got a little progress bar to go, right, so I started at a 1, I want to be at a 5, where do I sit now? Have I moved to a 2 or a 3? And it just gives you a really simple monitoring system. Does that make sense so far? Hopefully it does. And then level 3, essentially it's the same principle, but it's using a percentage bar, and it just gives a few more options. It basically goes from 1 to 5 to 1 to 10, essentially. So it's just a little bit different. Now, I put these levels here, not as like someone who's level 1 is like inexperienced with goals and someone who's level 3 is more experienced. It's more about preference. Some people like to go more into detail of actions that they want to take. Some people might like the scoring system. Some people might want to use percentages. And I'm more than happy to expand this if anyone's got any ideas or thoughts that they think might be helpful to them. Because if it's helpful to you, it might end up being helpful to someone else in the team as well. So I'm more than open to ideas on this, and I'd love to get some feedback as to if there's any different directions. And to the point where, to be honest, guys, and I'll put this out there now, this is the template, and I want to talk through the process in a second, if to how I want you to put it through, because there is method to the madness. But if you wanted to use this process, but literally have your own blank sheet of paper and like do it in drawings or illustrations, that's fine. Because I want you guys to make it yours and to make it your own, that you don't have to necessarily use this exact framework. Use the system and the process, but by all means, if you want to do it in a slightly different way where you draw it or you do it as your own table or whatever, if you got inspiration with that, then please run with it. I think it's way more fun that way. Right, so let me zoom in, and I'm gonna run through this step by step. So hopefully everyone can see that. Yeah. So essentially, there's a question. Let me just check that. Right. So Steve just asked, how many goals should we aim for? Now that's actually part of what I was going to say, Steve, but I'll address it now while you've asked. So in terms of seasonal outcome goals and vision goals, it's not. There's no rules to say that it needs to be a certain amount, whether it's 1 or 3 or whatever it is. But this is just my personal experience and take on this, that I think it's better to have one goal or a little collective of goals that relate to a very similar thing. So let's just say an outcome goal might be to qualify for regionals. So if that's the big outcome goal, you could then put what events you want to do. There's nothing wrong with having all of these different events and stuff. But the more you start adding all of these different things in, things can get lost. And if you've got 2 or 3 different goals for a season, for example, it can get very difficult to know specifically what you're working towards. And I know a year doesn't seem like a lot of time, but it certainly is. And for most of our swimmers, we're still age group and youth level. We've still got plenty of time. So having a really clear outcome or a really clear target for a season, just having one of them, in my mind, makes a lot of sense and makes it much more digestible. But again, I don't want to put rules on this. This is just kind of my thinking. And but if you feel like having a couple of different options on there, then that's absolutely fine. Fundamentally, when we get to the performance and the process goals, that's where you need to be a little bit more clear about what specifically you're moving towards, just so you don't have this big convoluted clutter of goals that you're trying to aim for. And the analogy I tend to use is, you want to go and master something. You don't want to be a jack of all trades and a master of none, if that makes sense. And that's kind of the analogy I would generally use for it. So Steve, please ask again if I didn't answer the question well there. Like, ask me again at the end by all means. So just to run through this whole process, guys, so then we can have questions at the end if anyone's got any. So nice simple things at the beginning. Obviously, athlete's name, what season year it is. I've put week beginning on there because, like I say, there's going to be times where periodically throughout the season. And you guys will understand more about this when I get to explaining and going through the group plans in the next couple of weeks, before we get back. You'll kind of start seeing where those are. But I think it's a good habit to be doing this on a weekly basis. I mean, to be honest, if you want to take it to the elite level, doing it every day, or giving yourself everyday goals that relate to your training cycle or season process and outcome goals or whatever they are, doing that each day that's kind of like top level stuff if you're doing it well. And it doesn't need to take half an hour. It can take 5 minutes for you to go through it and write yourself some really simple targets. And then each week, just make them that little bit more challenging and stretch them out. So you've got that little bit at the top just to put what the week is, if you're doing it per week, or if you whenever you happen to redo your goals, you can just fill in what the date is and you can keep a record of them. I'll put this little bar at the top because I think understanding or learning to understand what your personal values are is an important part of this process. And I think if you can tie your goals in with what you truly believe, kind of guides and moves you, I guess, as a person, then they become even more, without getting too hippy-drippy about it, become even more tangible and even more yours. So as an example of personal values, one of my personal values is an obvious one: hard work. So if a personal value is hard work, and I go through all of this, there's going to generally be a theme there of most of the goals and strengths and things like that I set for myself are going to be based around the fact that I need to work hard and I want to work hard to achieve that. And I'm going to be setting myself some pretty strong standards, if that makes sense. So again, this is something else we can talk about, but I think linking it to your personal values is very important. So this is a question. In terms of making the frameworks simpler, absolutely, I can definitely make it simpler. To be honest, I think the first two boxes, I think they're generally simple enough, but definitely down the bottom, if it ends up being a little bit too confusing or not quite there, then again, I'm more than happy to take it down a notch or two. But I will say things like goal setting, it's not that commonly taught for young people, and it is a challenge, and it's something that they may not be used to. So one thing I'll say is I'm more than happy to take it down a notch or two, but I would definitely give it a go first and challenge yourself to be uncomfortable with it, because I think that's kind of one of the big parts of goal setting. You need to be uncomfortable and you need to kind of test yourself to try and expand your horizons, because this kind of thing is definitely appropriate for young people in general. But like I said, the first thing I would definitely do is just give it a go and see where the little sticking areas are. But if it's really causing a big challenge, that's, like I said, stretching you too far, then absolutely we'll make some slight adjustments. So I'm going to run through this quick. In terms of the top end, like I said, this is all in an order, and it's a very specific order from top to bottom. So we need to start with what your vision is. Where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years' time? Now, even if you're at the top end of the program and you're kind of 16, 17 years old, and maybe you're not swimming beyond 18 or whatever it is, or maybe you're not quite sure, where do you want to be in terms of university or education or work? This doesn't have to just be about swimming. If you want to add things in that are outside of that, then do it, because it's a huge part of your life, guys. Swimming is not your career at this point in time. It's a career option, but you don't get paid to do it. And you guys have got school, you've got social lives to have, apparently. Probably better than mine. But there's a lot of different factors. So I think it's important to know where you want to be, and don't be afraid of writing things that you think may be a little bit out of reach at this point, because, like I said, that's the purpose. You've got to stretch your ideas and where you feel like you could go. And if you're not sure about kind of what the next level is, in terms of, maybe if you're not sure what the level is after counties or after regionals or nationals or whatever it is, then absolutely we can have different conversations about it. If anyone wants to ask me in another conversation about what those levels are, I'm more than happy to share. Or if you want me just to do a general video for everyone just to kind of talk about different levels of swimming performance, then please let me know, and I'll do that, just so everyone can kind of see where the opportunities are and what the possibilities are. So having a vision, where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. Then next level, which then links into where you want to be. So the big season outcome goals. What are your outcome goals for that season? Do you want to qualify for nationals? Do you want to PB in 5 events at regionals? Do you want to win medals? Do you want to, there's a whole list of things in that respect. Doesn't have to be as specific as set times, because that's what we can focus on later in performance goals. But what are the big things that you want? What's going to get you out of bed? Is achieving a national medal going to get you out of bed? If the answer is yes, that's where it needs to go. If you want to qualify for regionals or counties or whatever it is, those, they're not vague goals by any standards, but they're a bit more broad. But the big things that you really want to get out of that season, that's where that goes. And again, if you want to add in other things from other walks of life, then please do. And then as we move down, we've got a very similar thing for performance and process goals. So like I've said, for performance goals, they're things like competition skills, specific times that you want to hit in certain events. Or if you wanted to literally list a load of events, that's fine, and put times in there. Because fundamentally, a lot of, for you younger guys in particular, in transition or academy, a lot of the general skills that you need to improve on to achieve those times in the long term, you can pretty much generalize in, the actions you might take would be learning how to nail your race skills to the best of your ability, like starts or turns, for example, or finishes. It doesn't have to be, if you're not sure, don't try not to make it over specific. If you're having a little bit of trouble, start vague if you need to, and then make it that little bit more as you go, and we can have conversations. I've already said that a big part of this process, if none of you guys are experts in setting goals, and nor am I for that matter, but if you're not experienced in it, don't let that put you off. Give it a go. And then what myself and Liam and even Mike can do is we can help show you guys the best ways forward and give you tools and skills. And it's just like learning a skill in the pool. Goal setting is a psychological skill that can help you develop, like we've already said, motivation, self-confidence, all of these things that most athletes desire to have. They want to be confident when they hit the race. And setting goals and things like other skills like self-talk or imagery use, for example, those psychological skills, they can be trained and they can be developed just like any technical skill in the pool or any tactic or any race. So it's all the same principle. So from a performance goal perspective, any times, any skills that you want to nail, like for example, you want to be smashing 5 fly kicks off every single wall, and that's going to help you hit your performances that you can set that as your goal. In the next box, you then outline what your current strengths are and what any areas for improvement that you have for that skill. So let's just say it is fly kick. Your drive off the wall and your breakout might be your big strengths, but your area for improvement might be your tempo during your fly kicking, or maybe need a bit more ankle flexibility, or maybe I need to work on my streamline position. So understanding what your strengths are, because that's important for self-confidence, to make sure, because if you're not strong at it, then it's you're gonna be like, well, I'm just gonna be flogging a dead horse here, and it's gonna be having these challenges because all I'm doing is working on areas for improvement, and I'm not strong at something. But if you identify strengths, no matter how insignificant you feel like they are, it will make your life a lot easier when you're working on those areas for improvement as you move forward. And like I said, when you have those tough days or tired days where your brain's going, no, you can use this stuff to inspire you and to motivate you to make sure that you do the work. Next bit, actions that you'll take. So at this level, if you prefer writing what specific things you'll do in a training session, so let's just use the fly kick analogy still. If your butterfly, if your streamline position and your butterfly kicking needs work, your actions that could be along the lines of, I need to understand where what mistakes I'm making within my streamline technique, and then use my coach's feedback or ask for my coach's feedback whenever I don't nail my streamline, or ask the coach to watch the next couple of 100 meters or whatever it is, to then give me some feedback and to tell me when I am and when I'm not doing it. Those are some basic, simple action suggestions. But essentially, it's giving you things that you are going to do to actually get the work done. We talked about deadlines, achieve by. Now, again, you guys are in control of this. It could be a season. It could be 5 weeks, which is what I normally use for a small training cycle. It could be before the next competition, even though at the minute, obviously, we don't fully understand when exactly those are going to be. But it could be something along those lines. It could be a month, like by October, I'm going to hit that. Giving yourself a deadline is hugely important. And then the final column, I put priorities. Now, across all of these 4 process goals in this one, and on the other sheet, there's 6 areas. Now, if you've got more, guys, then feel free to print out more sheets, or you can double them up, maybe write 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 if you want to. Like I said, I think I'd always be more of the school of less is more. Focusing on trying to master things rather than throwing a load of things at the wall to see what sticks. But what this priority box gives you the ability to type or to write in, if you have to focus on one thing, what is the most important goal from a performance and process perspective, or across all of them, that you absolutely need to get right? And bear in mind, guys, that this can change from the start of the season. You can have the same goals for 6 months, for example, but at the start, your priority might be one thing. But as you get closer to competition, your priorities might shift a little bit, and that is absolutely natural. And just like what I mentioned with the score bars over here as well, I definitely want to point out that just because you might score yourself at, let's say, a 50% progress, doesn't mean that you won't go backwards. Because going backwards isn't always necessarily a negative thing. It could be, it could be that you just haven't put the work in, as an example. But think of it this way: if you're focusing on a specific process goal or performance goal and really trying to work hard at learning what it's all about, trying to build your skill in that area, what could happen is your perceived ability to do that, or your knowledge, could get so much more than it started at, that actually you realize that you've expanded your mind into so many other things. Now you've actually got better, but your perceived knowledge or your perceived ability could be less, because actually you're way better than you were before, and you're like, wow, I've still got so much more to go, or I've realized how much further I need to go in order to be awesome at this. So going backwards isn't always necessarily a negative thing. I hope that makes sense. It's funny, I rehearsed that explanation 100 times over the last couple of days, but that probably came off a little bit. Hopefully it came off. Yeah, so like I said, these 2 sections are the same in terms of their structure. One is performance goals. So what are the key skills or targets within the competition environment that you're going to set yourself? And the process goals are training-based techniques, skills, strategies that are key to helping you achieve these big season goals. And then hopefully, like, they should be having some link into what your future vision is. I mean, if you start from the bottom, and I've already mentioned this process of starting from the end and working backwards. We've set a vision, we've gone into a season, we've gone into competition focus work, and then we've gone into day-by-day session work. It's gone backwards. It gets more and more specific the more you go into the processes. But you absolutely have to have these processes. This is the foundation of everything that comes up here. Okay, that's why I put it in this particular order. So I'm just going to switch back to the presentation. And that is pretty much me done chatting away now, guys. I'm just going to pop my reference list up, just if anyone is interested in some of the reading that I got some of these ideas from. There are a load more that I've got different bits and pieces for this from. But if you want to do some reading, or if there's anything in there that's interesting, then I'm more than happy to talk about it. I'll pass it on.
All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoy that. This is just a little outro that, again, I've recorded a couple of days later just to kind of finish this off a little bit more. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful and informative. For most, it was probably things that you've seen and heard before. But I actually want to emphasize within that goal setting and developing mental skills, it's like any swimming technique or anything like that. It can be developed, and actually it's a hugely important part of this process, and one that can very much be neglected. Sorry, I just definitely found a little bit of hair sticking out there that I'm not sure about. So I hope it was helpful. I hope you got something from that. If you've got any suggestions about any tweaks to the layout, one thing in particular I've thought of in the last couple of days, people with different learning styles, if you're more visual, if you're more auditory, please send me some suggestions as to maybe how we can approach that, because we've got the sheet, and I think the sheet's important to write it down. But if you've got a different way of viewing things or learning or kind of downloading that information, then just suggest it to me. I'm very open to different ideas, and whatever kind of works for you as a person individually, I'm more than happy to accommodate. But the general structure that I put forward in terms of that vision, the outcomes for a season, the performance goals, the process goals, that needs to stay, because it is logically put into a progression there very deliberately. But if there's a different way that you want to lay it out, if you want to draw it, if you want to, if you want to make an audio recording, or if you want to make a video for yourself, by all means, please send me the suggestions, and we can look at how we tweak it for each person. So just to kind of finish this off, remember, goal setting is a tool that can be used, and it needs to be used and developed to help us develop other mental skills. And I mentioned two simple ones, things like self-confidence and motivation. We can develop your personal version of those using something like goal setting. It is an important tool to use in terms of psychological skills. So make sure that you're taking the time to really delve into that. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's given you something, and we'll look forward to progressing these forward and to putting them into the program and integrating all of that as we go. So thank you very much, guys. Have a great day.